Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for all of your kind words and your great feedback on my previous tutorial slash lecture on mixing industrial techno. I really appreciate all of your kind words. It makes me want to do this. It's February. It's a tough month, I think, for all of us. I'm recovering from COVID still. It's quite cold in Sweden right now. Um, but perfect opportunity to record one more lecture and tutorial, and I figured that we would talk a bit about mastering. So let's just get right into that. Right. So starting out as a master engineer, I wish it could be as simple as giving you a list of good plugins and then a couple of cool techniques to use when mastering. However, since mastering is the last process before shipping to the end customer or to the pressing plant and then to the consumer, the answer is a bit more complicated. Um, so I've been trying to like cut it up into sections as well as I can. So we're gonna and take a look at the different parts that it requires. But a main part, or the biggest part of learning how to master is learning the art of listening to music objectively. I would say, being analytical, having an analytical mindset. Hearing very subtle problems like aliasing, that can be almost inaudible sometimes. And obviously, this comes from years and years and years of practice and failing. Failing is the best way of learning, I think, even though it's hard to fail. Um, and practice and just doing it really is way more important than having like cool outboard gear and whatever. That doesn't really matter, it really doesn't. um the only thing when it comes to gear that it is important in mastering is a well-tuned room, that you've treated properly, and that you have full range speakers that allows you to hear what is in the track. We're gonna get into that more later on. But really, those are the two things that you're paying for when you are hiring a mastering engineer. You're paying um, for years of experience and knowledge in doing something, and you're paying for room or speakers that is clinically treated. So all those things kind of add up, and they make a big difference to ensure optimal playback on streaming services, vinyl, and I think maybe most importantly, since we're talking techno, club systems. Now that is a big one, and it can be daunting. But if you have a good room, if you have good speakers, then it's gonna sound good in the club too. One of the first things that you're gonna need is a lot of material to practice on, and by that I mean pre-masters, obviously. And this does not in any way include your own music. I'm dead serious. That's not an option. Contact a bunch of people and see if they might have some tracks lying around that you can practice on. I assume that the Techno production sub on Reddit would be a good place to start. Otherwise, if you have friends, people close to you that make electronic music, because in house techno, drum and bass, it's going to be relatively close on how you approach mastering them. I wouldn't maybe start on like rock music and stuff like that, because if it's techno that you want to do, it's always a good thing to specialize in something. So start with electronic music. If you can find specifically techno, even better. And again, not your own music, does not count. The DAW that you work in will work. No need to get a new one. If you're in Ableton, Logic, or whatever it is, that's completely fine. VSTs, I wouldn't concern myself with too much right now. I will put together a bundle for you all with the plugins that are free and that are up to, mastering grade standard. So I will put that link out for you too. But going back to kind of a certain starting point would be your room and your speakers. So in production and mixing, we can often get away with no to very little acoustic treatment whatsoever. And this is not really an alternative in mastering, unfortunately. Now, I personally, I really don't agree with the engineers who try to gatekeep the mastering community. And what I mean by that is that I've heard so many engineers say, oh, you need at least $100,000 studio to even start mastering, or you have to start in a big studio as an apprentice. I call bullshit on that. And I think they're saying that to kind of scare people away from it because they want to be up in their ivory tower, because they know that this is not true either. You can make fucking great masters with a pretty tight budget, but then you need to work all the more. Do the best with what you have. Don't expect people to pay you from the beginning. You need to learn what you're doing first. You can't charge people if you are not sure that this is going to work in a club or on a record. You need to know your speakers extremely well and how they translate into other systems, treatment or no treatment. If you don't know this, then you need to start listening to different systems. You can take your own productions that you've done and compare to other systems. Let's say on all the other systems that you listen to, there's too much bass in all of those when you play back. Then you can kind of assume that you're adding too much bass because there's a problem in your room. A good and free place to start is to locate the best speaker position in your room. And now normally this is in the middle of the shortest wall, and then the speakers playing down the length of your room. This can vary, and I'm not an acoustics expert in any case, in any way, but that's 9 out of 10 times that's the best positioning. Again, treatment, going a bit further to that, it can be quite expensive, but it would also raise the listening environment exponentially. So every treatment that you add will make the other treatment work better. Also, it doesn't have to be expensive. Like, first of all, there's in Berlin, I know that there's one company called Kiss Your Ears. They have bass traps for like €100 each. There's GIK Acoustics. My favorite, I use their tri-traps in all my corners. They're absolutely amazing. But you can also build your own. You need 4 pieces of wood, some rock wool, and some nice fabric, and like a screwdriver. And basically that's it. Now, if you take a look at my room here, I'll put up a picture here. Now, you can see I have, first of all, on each side, first reflection point, I have a bass trap. Boom. Over that first reflection bass trap is 2 foam absorbers to kill kind of a flutter echo that I had moving around. And then in the corner there, you can see my tri-traps or my bass traps. Behind the speakers, there's a broadband absorber with a very high density rock wool in them. And then above me, I have 2 clouds that are just a normal broadband absorber. And then on my back wall, I have more tri-traps from GIK. But make sure that you don't buy the foam. You need the rock wool. That's what you want. That's most bang for the buck. And regarding speakers, again, make sure that you know them very well. If you have a budget for a new pair, a fairly cheap and very good monitor is the Focal Solo 6. That's the one I use. They're about €1,000 each. What would that be? $1,200 each, something like that. Maybe a bit more. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of money, but that's kind of where you need to aim. That's a good, and that's a low budget mastering monitor as well. I've ordered the Trio 6s from Focal instead. But I can't go bigger than that because of the limitations in my room, unfortunately. Everyone doesn't have that option or the possibility of doing that. Then again, do the best with what you have. That's all you can do, really. And no one says that you have to be Bobcats at the end of the day. You might be doing this just because you think it's fun, and that's totally fine as well. So with VSTs, I mentioned it early before, but don't spend your money on VSTs. That's not going to make you a better master engineer. Honestly, it's better to learn how to make great masters with shitty plugins than the opposite, really. And also, there's so many amazing mastering grade VSTs. In fact, I would say that there's really only one type of plugin that I haven't found anywhere for free that is up to scratch for mastering, which is gain matching. I would say that that's the one thing that you would need to invest in. Personally, I would recommend the M Compare from Melda Audio. Then there's also one from Ian Shepherd called Perception. I have never used it, but I've heard great things about it. So now we're going to talk a bit more about the technical side rather than rooms and speakers and stuff like that. Let's take a look at the technical side, that what we actually need to employ in a master to make it sound as good as possible. Now I divided this up into a few steps. So the first step, obviously, we need to figure out what the track actually needs. And that's before you do anything at all. Listen, figure out what the track needs in terms of EQ or compression. Identify, potential problems such as annoying peaks or, whatever it might be. And obviously, the better your listening environment is, the easier this job is going to get or going to be. To help you on that road, though, to kind of like to make it a bit easier, again, we need reference tracks. Get tracks that are professionally mixed and mastered, or at least mastered. Gain match that to your pre-master, and then compare and see how much low end, how much high end, how much low mids, how much compression do they have? Do they have any compression at all? Do they have too much or not enough? Things like these. Try to find something in a song that you haven't found before. Whether it's a new instrument that is like very, very subtle, or if you can identify a certain effect that is really subtle. All these things are very good ear training, and it's going to help you on your way. Try to listen, learn how compression sounds, because compression can be kind of difficult to hear sometimes if it's not super obvious. Also, don't forget to look at your meters, such as span or Ulean loudness meter. They offer good information if something is very low in volume or if something is barely audible. So, I mean, obviously ears first, but then it's also always a good idea to check the meters. It can be a good idea to kind of keep a notebook. And I have, let me show you. Here I have a pink notebook. I do my to-do lists, and then I just scribble notes down for when I'm mastering a track. because then we don't need to keep that in our heads. Then we can just focus on what I forgot to mention before is that I'm going to talk a lot about like workflow and how to get to be not efficient, but to make it easier. Because if you're going to have to keep everything in your head all the time, then you're going to make it difficult for yourself. So a notebook is a great way. Like time 230, too much low mids, transient event, in snare, too loud, push down, blah blah blah. Whatever it might be. But this is a nice thing to have, or do it on your computer. I prefer to write by hand. Once we've identified what the problems are, obviously we need to do something about it. Then we need to start processing the premaster. Jumping into Ableton here, signal flow in the mastering chain it's very personal. So you're gonna find your own way here by experimenting. Your main objective should always to be do no harm. Our responsibility as mastering engineers is to keep the artist's vision intact while making it balanced, loud enough, without applying too much compression and limiting. And this can be quite a daunting task, especially in the beginning. But I've prepared a fairly typical, for me, signal flow of a mastering chain. This is how I like to do it. So we're gonna go through this. As you can see, I'm running 3 dynamic EQs in a row. Then I have another EQ, a static EQ, a compressor, a limiter, and then I've set up my compare, which is my gain matching plugin, and then I have an ozone here. This is just sometimes if there's a bit too much side information in the lows or whatever it might be, then you can tighten that up a little bit. 4 EQs in total. 2 of these with the Auto Dynamic EQ, I do most of my problem solving. So here I'm gonna be in these 2 instances. I try to aim to have all my problem solving done within these 2 EQs, right? And then I have the TDR Nova, which is also dynamic EQ, the TDR Slick EQ Mastering Edition. And those are not, the Auto Dynamic EQ is a very clean and transparent EQ, while the TDR Nova and the Slick EQ have their own flavor, so to speak. The Nova even has a little bit of saturation in it, if I remember the manual correctly. That's also a thing. Don't forget to read manuals on when you're starting to master. That's actually really important. I know people hate it, but so and the compressor, the TDR Mallet GE. That's kind of that can go either way. Sometimes I use it for problem solving. Sometimes it's for flavor. This has a lot of character, this compressor. So it's not for every song. Sometimes it doesn't work on the stereo, and you can do it just on the diff or what's called the sides, for example. But that's details. So let's get into that another time, I think. Another thing, it's often a good idea to run more instances of the same type of plugin that do less. So right, again, problem solving first, then we have a little bit of flavor. This is like swings both ways, so to speak. And then you can always move stuff around. For those of you who are interested, the compare, it's really easy to set up. When you put it on your track channel, it's going to look like this. You will have to press generate source and then choose which source you want to generate. So let's do 1. How this works then is that when I go to my last, when I press here, when it lights up green, that means that all of my plugins are bypassed and the premaster is loudness compensated. which means that there's no loudness deception. So I always know if I'm making the pre-master louder or better. And you will have to press here and then detect. We are going to start with one plugin, obviously, to focus on that. I think that's normally the best way to go, instead of like fumbling around with 3, 4 at the same time. The technique here first is the same, actually, that we did in the mixing session. Controlling resonances, abrasive things, calming stuff down. First, we can have a look or have a listen at the to the track, maybe. And for copyright reasons, I've had to use one of my own tracks, which is kind of a bummer because I'm a big I'm kind of against mastering your own music for several reasons, which we're gonna go into later as well. Right, let's have a listen. I'm gonna just turn the master down so I am not ruining anyone's ears. So if you're on headphones, especially, be careful, please. Right, let's go. Actually, that was fine. Right, so this is a fairly hard techno track, and has that typical stylistic features. So to the person who was maybe someone who was very attentive, heard that here I start to pan these kick drums that I made into percussion, which means that there's a lot of low end information, like moving from left to right, right to left. We can play that again. Right. There's a myth that club systems are mono. For some reason, I do not know where that comes from. If you know, please tell me, because I've been to most major clubs in Berlin. And none of them have been mono. They're mono usually under 150 to 200 hertz, but never the entire spectrum. But what I want to do here is that I want to tighten that up a little bit. So let's just solo that for a second, and because I wanted to shoot right down the middle, honestly. Like I don't need it to flail about, and I want to check here too the low mids. A lot of times this actually gives the low end more power and more authority. So let's try it. I've gain matched again here, and bypass is bypass. You know what that is. But again, we always need to gain match to avoid loudness deception. So let's listen to this with these changes made here. I'm happy with that. Cool. Let's move on. We don't need to put more effort into that. I think that's pretty good. If you're just playing the low end right down the middle, honestly, you can't really go wrong. This is gonna be weird. This is gonna be nice, tight, and snug. Because that's what we're looking for, a powerful, nice, tight, snug low end. EQ, again, same as we did last time. So I'm kind of just gonna go blow through this, and if you have questions, let me know in the comments and I'll get to it. Okay, so what did I do here? Basically the same technique as in the previous tutorial where we went through how to subtly control and calm down resonant frequencies. So I have one instance of a dynamic EQ running in the high frequency spectrum and one in the lower frequency spectrum. Secondly, I've applied a TDR Nova here as well. That is doing... It's basically cutting the things or controlling, calming down the things that I didn't really want to affect in this instance. So here I apply much faster attack times than I did in these instances, and these are it's for specific kind of peaks or things that are a bit harsher, that have quicker attack times. So first of all, identify the problems, try to deal with them, preferably with a dynamic EQ, and then you move on. Let's listen to this. We need to compare, right? We need to, like we talked about before, we need to listen to compare. So again, I have the M compare, which bypasses all my plugins and loudness compensates. So there is no loudness deception. In the M compare, you can also have up to 4 different reference tracks. Which comes in handy for both mixing and mastering. So let's just compare the pre-master to the master first of all. When it's white like this, the source 1, that means that we are listening to the master. When I press here and it turns green, that means we are listening to the pre-master loudness compensated. So let's start here by listening to the pre-master, and for about 20-30 seconds ish, and then I'm gonna switch over. Let's go. So there's not a huge difference yet. That's mostly because we've done very surgical cuts that aren't going to be super obvious, but are going to help us down the line. So now what I want to do is I want to start some gentle EQing. Again, I've only really done corrective EQing, I've only really done subtractive EQ, and I haven't really added anything else. So now I want to start adding gentle notches to kind of make up what the track is slightly missing. So I'm gonna start doing that with the TDR Slick EQ Mastering Edition. And you guys just kind of follow along, and yeah, let's get into it. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that. So what did I do here? Right. Well, my initial instinct was that this track lacks a little bit. It's a bit too bit of noise still in the low mids that I kind of want to bring down a little bit. There's this kind of like white noisy thing, and I wanted to pump up the root note of the kick drum instead. And high shelf on the highs there. There's gonna do that actually too. Yeah. To bring out those the nice sparkly bits around 10-20k. And gentle strokes here. I am also monoing the low frequency here from 100 hertz. And then on this EQ, you have direct access to sideband information, which I think is pretty neat. So on each band, you have direct control over side information, less, more. You also have left and right. So if there's any imbalance in the stereo width, this EQ is extremely cool. It's a quick way of... And then also you have the brightness. You can shift the whole... and this is... it's relative to these settings that you've done before. Because I feel that this track is slightly too brittle. Now with these changes, obviously I want to compare and with the pre-master and master like we did before. But now I want to start incorporating reference tracks. So let's play the master and then compare that against our little reference tracks here. So what I'm looking for here is the general balance. Is my track up to scratch? When it comes to the balance, does it have roughly the same amount of highs, of lows, stuff like that. And I'm pretty happy with this actually. I think this is a good balance. One way to kind of think about it is if this master was playing next to any of these tracks in a DJ set, would it be like, whoa, what is going on here? Or would it be a natural kind of transition fidelity wise? And I think it would be here. So we are pretty set to move on. We're going to talk about adding some flavor, some groove, but also how to deal with annoying peaks like this one here, for example. I wanted to talk to you about some other types of problem solving, which are common in mastering, which would be peaks, like sporadic peaks that kind of protrude way above everything else. Snares is a common thing to do that, for example. And these can cause some problems with triggering compressors or limiters too quickly. And most people's response to this is to compress the whole signal. But honestly, the best solution is often to address these individually if they are sporadic. So like this one, for example. Now, this is not really a huge problem. This is more, and I kind of had to manufacture this peak. But this is more to show you that what's possible and what is, what you can do. Obviously, this doesn't work if the peak is above 0. Then you need a new mixdown. But I prepared a. If we look at this peak, it does protrude way above everything else. Or slightly above everything else. So there are two different ways of dealing with those peaks. And either you automate them, obviously not like this. But I'm going to show you or explain to you why I did this. Very fast transients. Most humans are only able to tell, for example, 2 transient events apart if they are between 20 to 30 milliseconds apart. And less than that, then they merge. So this means that transient events beneath 20 to 30 milliseconds that mess with your peak levels can be reduced quite heavily without causing any audible issues. Like this, for example. Honestly, or obviously, this should be done with great artists. Artist's track. So we are obviously not doing this, but I wanted to show you that you will not hear this. Let's listen. You do not hear that. That is impossible to hear. You can't hear it. And it's not because your ears aren't well trained. It is because it's literally impossible. Your brain is not capable of perceiving differences that quickly. So what we can do in this situation when peaks are messing with what we need to do or what we want to do with the track, we kind of do this. We automate it down. Boom, that's done. And now you are, let's just make sure, 0, 0, 0, 0, -4, -4, yes. This might look destructive, but this is actually way more transparent than compressing the whole signal just to suppress one transient event or a few transient events that are sporadic. Again, you cannot hear this, that we've done this, but you've solved quite a big problem. Later, when your signal is going into your limiter, this peak will no longer be such a big problem because this is most likely a kick drum or a snare or something else that would trigger your limiter more. and give you a short burst of audible distortion. Now, all of a sudden, we've solved that problem. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should do this on every tiny little peak like this, because these are not problems. What I'm talking about is peaks that are way above everything else. Again, I manufactured this peak to make an example. This is a neat technique to know, and you can also know that this is absolutely fine to employ this technique if you're having problems. And actually, this is preferable to compressing everything. Let's talk about compression for a little bit. Now, this is highly dependent on the pre-master that you receive. A lot of materials that I receive, for example, are already quite heavily compressed. In those cases, you should not really apply any more compression. You know, compression can be used as either as a problem solver to kind of like control some annoying peaks, or if there's something that need to be gently pushed down. But in a lot of cases, we can, as I've showed, we can deal with these in more transparent ways than to just compress the entire signal. I want to try to compress this track a little bit and to see what happens. It's more out of curiosity. I don't think that the compression is going to work very well on this because we have a nice even waveform. The breaks are there's a nice dynamic range here. Because even though it's techno, like the breaks should not be as loud as the I hate the word drops, but for lack of a better word. If you do that, you lose the impact of the break itself. If everything is just as if you compress this up to the same level as this, then that's just going to be loud. And usually what happens in the breaks is that you remove low end information, which means that you only really have mids, maybe some low mids from like a synthesizer or something like that, and then highs. And if you compress this to the same level as the drop, that means that you will have a super brittle and harsh part of the track that's just gonna be unpleasant to listen to. So I want to keep the dynamic between the breaks and the refrain or the chorus or the drop or whatever. So that means I'm not going to like squash it with the ridiculous ratios and thresholds. I'm going to keep it 1:4 is 1:4, 1:5 is usually a pretty good ratio. But let's see what happens. I'm going to mess around here and let's listen. See, I'm not liking what the compressor is doing to the transient in my kick drum. So as I suspected, like this track is not really going to gain anything from compression, and that's what we have to ask ourselves in mastering. What am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? Does the track benefit from it, or am I just throwing it on there just because I think there's supposed to be a compressor on a master? So I'm actually going to scrap this bite. What we can do is take a look at our limiter, because the limiter is a useful tool for First of all, controlling, making sure that nothing gets past 0.0 dBFS with ISPs, intersample peaks, or true peaks. Also, we need to be, you don't always have to limit, but in techno, since it's such a loud genre, I would say that you're going to use it in 99 times of 100, if not more. And sometimes it might be useful to feed the limiter a more even signal. I'm going to start with the compressor off. So in my limiter, I usually go with a multiband limiter first, because it sounds a bit much more gentler than a brick wall. This is a clipping unit as well. And then finally the output stage. There is a high frequency limiter as well, which can control harshness and stuff like that. So I'm going to leave that on, and then we're going to try and see what happens to the track itself. Again, we want to keep the track intact. We want to keep transients intact. So we don't want to distort anything. As soon as I hear any type of audible distortion, I back the limiter off. I don't care what the LUFS reading is. It doesn't matter. A slightly lower master is preferable to digital distortion. But let's play this and see what happens, and also compare. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that. So, first of all, I'm not doing any crazy amounts of gain reduction. I'm doing roughly combined in all these three units or modules. I'm doing roughly 2.5 dB gain reduction in the limiter. I've set my peak to my threshold to minus 0.6. This is a bit different. Some say you have to put it at -1. to account for kind of faulty encoders, MP3 encoders. 0.6, then some people do minus 0.3. I usually like around minus 0.6. Sometimes I go minus 1. It depends on the medium. It depends on the track, on the what the track kind of needs. But I think I've found for me, there's like a golden Goldilocks zone where the track gets the maximum amount of impact and loudness, clarity and punch versus how much gain reduction you're doing. So I'm not squashing the track in the limiter. Kind of gently notching it up, giving it some more loudness. And now I did some compression to feed the rest of the modules a bit more of an even signal, but we're still keeping the kind of dynamic range and the difference between the breaks and the drop are there. So we don't have the same loudness or perceived loudness in breaks and in drops. So we are keeping the impact. I am gonna export this, and then you can see what this looks like in the end. All right, so that was a bit about limiting. Again, keep in mind to not do too much gain reduction on your limiter. Aim for maximum -3 if you can, but this also depends on your limiter, of course. Now, we would assume that the limiter is a natural ending point to our signal chain in mastering. However, there's one thing that we haven't discussed so far, and that is dithering. I can't really think of a nerdier, push your glasses all the way up your nose topic. You've probably seen dithering when exporting in your DAW. If I jump into Ableton here, we can. So below where you choose the file format, the bit depth, and then under there you have a couple of different dither options. Now I prefer to use a dither, the dither in my limiter. It comes with a 16-bit dither option. There's also 24-bit dither. But what is dithering? So I think a lot of people are confused about that topic because it is very nerdy and it's very esoteric. The short answer is that dither is a low-level noise that you apply every time you reduce your bit depth. Normally in mastering, I recommend people to, if you work in 32-bit float, then export in 32-bit float. So don't dither on the pre-master, for example. But in general, we apply dithering when reducing from 24 to 16 bits, for example. Now, why do we do this? So dithering is a solution to kind of a perpetual problem in audio production, which is converting or analyzing a signal, an analog signal, whether it's in or out, with ones and zeros. We can experience problems with amplitude, fidelity, or resolution, or what you want to call it. This is because ones and zeros are not enough to measure an analog signal, or they are enough for human hearing, but especially in 32 and 24-bit. But when you go down to 16-bit, you can have problems called quantization distortion. And in 32-bit float and 24-bit, a vast majority of humans are not even able to hear this. But in 16-bit, they can indeed be audible, and they can come in many different forms. For now, I think let's keep it at whenever you do a master and you export, you apply dither when you reduce the bit depth. That's basically it. Also keep in mind that most distributors today, they only really accept 16-bit files. They won't accept 32-bit floats, certainly not, and not 24-bit. So a normal, if you're gonna get your music on Spotify or whatever it is, they only accept 16-bit. Personally, I only really send the clients a 24-bit file for vinyl cutting, or if the client wants a high fidelity, high resolution file for live purposes such as a DJ set. So I hope that cleared some things up regarding dithering. Let's recap quickly, and then that's all I have to say, really. This has been a scratch on the surface regarding mastering, and there's loads more to cover. But hopefully this has been a good base to start on. So let's recap. First of all, you listen, you analyze problematic areas. Once you've done so, you solve problems with dynamic EQ. Few different ones if you want. Keep in mind that more instances of the same plugin that do less is better. Number 3, apply flavor and impact and balance your track. This can be done with static EQ or dynamic EQ, whatever you prefer and whatever you like the sound of. Here you can also utilize compression for groove. Step 4, limit. Find a nice gain reduction to loudness ratio that sits well with the track. If you hear distortion or over limiting, then back the limiter off slightly. Or go back and see if there's any problem that you can solve so that the limiter won't be triggered as quickly. Number 5, dither. Either a 16-bit or 24-bit dither, depending on the bit depth of your pre-master. Now, and keep in mind to always check in every step your master against your pre-master. Again, keep in mind, do no harm. We want to keep the artist's vision intact. We want to make the master have more impact than the pre-master. Always check against reference tracks. And you should be all set. Remember to fail. Do it over and over and over. That's the way to learn. Again, this was a scratch on the surface regarding mastering. I hope it cleared up a few things. If you need to get in touch with me, I'm going to put my email down here. Feel free to reach out. You can also reach out on Reddit, where my username is NEMastering. Until next time, we will be covering some other interesting stuff. Until then, keep in touch. Ciao.